In the 1980s, some movies were so extreme they didn't just shock audiences, they triggered government bans, police seizures, and mass protests from the US to Europe. Official records tell of films sliced by 9 minutes or more by the MPAA, pulled from screens under pressure from furious parents and labeled too dangerous by censors in Australia, Canada, and beyond. Yet these 15 shocking 1980s movies didn't disappear. They changed cinema forever, rewriting the rules on what theaters dared to show. Why did these films cross the line? And what was so powerful that entire countries tried to lock them away? The answers are wilder than you think, and it all starts now. Number 15, My Bloody Valentine, 1981. George Mihalka's Canadian slasher promised heart-shaped terror, but audiences never saw the full carnage. The MPAA demanded nearly 9 minutes of gore sliced out. Pickaxe kills, impaled bodies, entire set pieces gone, just to avoid an X rating. Mihalka fought for his vision, but the studio caved, fearing a box office death sentence. The missing footage became legend, whispered about in horror circles for decades. For years, fans hunted grainy bootlegs, searching for the lost Valentine. When the uncut version finally surfaced in 2009, it felt like forbidden treasure, proof that censorship can't erase a film's impact. Number 14, The Burning, 1981. Tony Malam's summer camp nightmare faced the same fate. The MPAA forced out Tom Savini's notorious raft massacre, hacking the film down by minutes. Critics called it gratuitous, horror fans called it authentic. But the real battle played out behind closed doors, as producers argued with the ratings board over every frame of splatter. The cuts didn't save it from controversy. In the UK, it landed on the DPP's infamous prosecution list, fueling the video nasty panic. Today, The Burning's full gore is restored, but its legend was built on what censors tried to hide. Number 13, Silent Night, Deadly Night, 1984. Charles Cellier's Killer Santa movie didn't just upset critics. It sparked a national outrage. Parents stormed theaters, picketed with homemade signs, and bombarded TriStar with angry calls. The studio pulled TV ads after just 6 days, but the protests kept growing. By the end of its first week, major theater chains dropped the film entirely. News anchors debated whether a horror movie could ruin Christmas. The image that stuck, a blood-red Santa arm clutching an axe halfway down a chimney, burned into the public memory. Despite, or because of, the backlash, the film became a cult staple, its ban fueling midnight screenings for years. If 80s cinema fascinates you, hit subscribe. The next films only get wilder. Number 12, Scanners, 1981. David Cronenberg's psychic shocker didn't just rattle North American censors. It sent a jolt through the Commonwealth. In 1982, the Ontario Film Review Board gathered for a tense meeting, sifting through complaints about exploding heads and mind control. Their verdict? Ban. The film was seized from video shelves across Ontario, with OFRB minutes citing prolonged graphic violence as grounds. Local distributors scrambled, some quietly circulating uncut tapes to horror fans hungry for the forbidden. Across the globe, Australia's classification board took its own hard line. In 1987, Refusal Notice RC-1987-219 landed on Cronenberg's desk. Refused classification. The film couldn't be shown, sold, or even advertised. The ban covered every state, and customs officers intercepted VHS shipments at the border. For years, Scanners was a ghost in Australia. Talked about, never seen. What made it dangerous wasn't just the infamous head explosion, but the film's cold, clinical style. Cronenberg's camera lingered unblinking as veins bulged and minds broke. It felt less like a monster movie, more like a medical experiment gone wrong. Despite, or because of, the bans, Scanners became a cult touchstone. Filmmakers from Peter Jackson to the Wachowskis cite its influence. Today it's restored, celebrated, and finally legal. But for a generation, it was the movie your local video store clerk whispered about. The one that could get you in trouble just for watching. Number 11. Turkey Shoot, 1982. In Australia, homegrown horror faced its own crackdown. Brian Trenchard Smith's dystopian bloodbath was banned outright by the Australian Classification Board, who cited excessive and gratuitous violence in their 1982 refusal. The ruling wasn't just a formality. It sparked a national debate about censorship, with politicians and newspaper columnists weighing in. Copies were seized from cinemas and video shops, and the film was cut down by nearly 10 minutes before it could play in some territories. The violence wasn't just graphic, it was political. Turkey Shoot's story of prisoners forced into a deadly game hit too close to home for some, echoing fears about government overreach in a turbulent era. The film's reputation grew as an Ozploitation legend, passed from hand to hand in battered VHS sleeves. Its influence rippled out, inspiring later dystopian thrillers and even reality TV. The image that stuck: a blood-soaked arena, barbed wire, glinting under harsh lights, and a single, desperate survivor staring down the regime. Today, Turkey Shoot is uncut and unashamed, a reminder that sometimes the censors only make a film's legend stronger. Number 10. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's first film didn't just test limits, it shattered them. Skipping cinema censors, it landed on home video shelves, uncut and unclassified by the British Board of Film Classification. In 1983, police raided UK video shops, seizing copies under the Obscene Publications Act. Shop owners faced prosecution, not just distributors. The gore, chainsaws, demonic forests, buckets of blood was trimmed by up to 7 minutes in some countries, but bans only fueled demand. Bootleg tapes circulated in secret, spreading the film's legend. Raimi's kinetic style inspired a wave of imitators. Today, The Evil Dead is a cult classic, but in the early 80s, renting it could mean a criminal record. Number 9. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. Umberto Lenzi's film was never meant for mainstream release. The BBFC refused to classify it, and the UK banned it outright. Even before submission, 6 minutes of animal cruelty and violence were cut, but police still seized tapes, and it landed on the DPP's banned list. In Australia, Refusal Certificate RC-1983-1457 kept it out. In the US, it played as Make Them Die Slowly, but controversy followed everywhere. The mix of staged gore and real animal deaths shocked critics and censors. Some viewers fainted or walked out. Collectors hunted for copies, drawn by its notoriety. The debate lingers: exploitation or anthropology? In memory, a smoky jungle, torchlight, and the threat of violence just beyond sight. Number 8. Anthropophagus, 1980. Joe D'Amato's Cannibal film didn't just get banned. It was prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act and added to the DPP's video nasty list. Pre-cut British VHS tapes became black market treasures. The stark, stripped-down style made the violence more jarring. D'Amato claimed serious intent, but authorities saw only depravity. Uncut versions were whispered about, nearly impossible to find. Today it's restored and studied. But in the 1980s, it was the film you needed connections to see. A candlelit villa, a looming shadow, and the audience holding its breath for what came next. Number 7. Cannibal Apocalypse, 1980. Antonio Margheriti's film didn't just borrow from the cannibal craze, it twisted it. This was Vietnam trauma as viral infection, a story where returning soldiers brought something back from the jungle. And it wasn't just memories. In the UK, the authorities saw more than gore. They saw a threat. Prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act, the film landed on the notorious video nasties list. Bootleg copies changed hands in backrooms, while tabloids warned of its corrupting influence. In 2005, the British Board of Film Classification finally allowed a cut version, trimming just 2 seconds for animal cruelty, proof that some wounds take decades to heal. Margheriti claimed he was making a metaphor, not a monster movie, but censors weren't interested in nuance. The image that lingers, a rat darting through neon-lit sewers, flames flickering behind, violence always just out of frame. Number 6. Turkey Shoot, 1982. Brian Trenchard Smith's dystopian shocker took aim at political paranoia. In Australia, the censors didn't just refuse classification, they made an example of it. The Australian Classification Board's 1982 ruling called out excessive and gratuitous violence, and the film was pulled from theaters. Nearly 10 minutes vanished in some territories, but even that didn't save it from seizure. Turkey Shoot wasn't just brutal, it was pointed. The story of prisoners hunted for sport echoed fears of government overreach, and that made it dangerous. Newspaper columns debated its message, while battered VHS tapes became cult artifacts. Trenchard Smith leaned into the chaos, blending pulp action with a grim warning about authoritarianism. The unforgettable image, a gladiator pit, barbed wire glinting, and a lone survivor staring down a faceless regime. Today, both films are restored, their reputations built on the very outrage that tried to silence them. Different themes, same fate. When movies poke at society's raw nerves, the censors come running. Police raids didn't just scatter crowds, they lit a fuse. When authorities stormed projection booths or seized stacks of tapes, the message was clear. Some stories weren't meant to be seen. But the hunger for the forbidden only grew. Censors could pull a film from shelves, but they couldn't erase the rumors. In back rooms, thick with cigarette smoke, bootleggers copied tapes by the dozen, each new generation fuzzier, but more coveted. Kids swapped battered VHS cases at playgrounds, trading titles like contraband. At midnight swap meets, collectors haggled over grainy copies, each promising a glimpse of something outlawed. For some, the risk was real. Fines, police records, even jail time. Yet the thrill of the chase made the films more valuable. Urban legends grew around lost scenes and whispered edits. Did someone really smuggle out an uncut reel? Was there a version so shocking it drove a viewer to madness? Stories like these spread faster than any official release. Late-night screenings became rituals. Word spread through coded flyers and whispered invitations. Behind blacked-out windows, crowds packed into cramped rooms, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a shared secret. Some came to be scandalized, others just to say they'd survived. The films themselves became a kind of password, a way to join a club that thrived on risk and rebellion. The more the authorities cracked down, the more determined the audience became. In the shadows of shuttered cinemas and behind the locked doors of video stores, a new kind of film culture took root. It wasn't just about gore or shock value anymore. The real battle lines were drawn around ideas. Who got to decide what could be seen, what could be said, and who had the right to be outraged? The next scandal was already brewing, and this time it would hit even harder. Angel Heart, 1987. Alan Parker's supernatural noir collided with censors and faith leaders before it even reached theaters. The MPAA slapped the film with an X rating, not for violence, but for a single fevered scene between Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet. Parker trimmed 10 seconds to avoid commercial death, earning an R, but the controversy only grew. The Catholic League called for boycotts, denouncing the film's mix of voodoo, sexuality, and religious imagery. Feminist critics split. Some saw Bonet's role as exploitation, others as a rare moment of agency. The image that stuck, a blood-soaked bed, rain hammering the glass, a cross hanging in shadow, became shorthand for everything the era's moral guardians feared. Angel Heart survived, its reputation fueled by outrage and debate. Hail Mary, 1985. Jean-Luc Godard's modern nativity provoked condemnation from the Vatican and bans in cities like Boston. In Minneapolis, protesters stormed a theater and stole the only print. Godard's Mary, a teenager, naked and uncertain, was too much for many. Catholic groups picketed, prayed, and handed out flyers, while art house crowds lined up, drawn by the scandal. The film's defining image, a girl by a sunlit lake, wrestling with faith and doubt. Hail Mary is now dissected for its style, but in 1985, it was a dare to the faithful. Evil Speak, 1981. Eric Weston's tech horror faced bans from the BBFC and an X rating from the MPAA unless scenes of gore and occult violence were cut. Weston complied, but the film's reputation as a lightning rod for outrage stuck. Evangelicals protested. Horror fans traded uncut tapes, and the film's computer-driven evil felt eerily current. The lasting image, a glowing terminal, red in the dark, as Linda Blair's spiritual heir unleashes hell. Savage Streets, 1984. Linda Blair's vengeance thriller drew MPAA cuts for violence and assault, yet still ignited feminist debate. Banned in parts of the UK, it split critics and activists alike. Blair's performance, rage and sorrow, became a symbol of the era's culture wars. Number 1. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. Martin Scorsese spent nearly a decade fighting for the right to make this film, but nothing prepared him for the global firestorm it would unleash. Before it even opened, religious leaders from Rome to Rio called for a total ban. Pope John Paul II condemned the movie's vision as a distortion of sacred truth. In the United States, the outrage was immediate and organized. In Atlanta, city officials threatened legal action if the film screened, while Cinemark and other chains canceled showings after bomb threats and pickets. Minneapolis made headlines when protesters broke into a theater and stole the only print, determined to keep it from ever being seen. The protests weren't just loud, they were relentless. Across France, Italy, and South America, crowds filled streets, waving banners and reciting prayers outside cinemas. In New York, Scorsese received death threats. The film's depiction of Christ, torn between divinity and human desire, was branded as blasphemy by coalitions of Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox leaders. Some theaters hired private security, screening the film behind locked doors. Others buckled under pressure, pulling it mid-run as angry crowds chanted outside. For weeks, news anchors debated whether the First Amendment could withstand this kind of fury. What made the backlash so fierce wasn't just the subject matter, but the scale. This wasn't a fringe protest, it was a worldwide campaign, coordinated across continents, with papal statements and petitions landing on studio desks. The unforgettable image, a movie poster shrouded in black cloth, a silent crowd holding candles, and the words "banned" stamped across the marquee. Today, The Last Temptation of Christ is studied for its artistry and ambition. But in 1988, it was the film that drew a line in the sand between art, faith, and freedom. Content warning: religious themes and depictions that sparked global protest. Between 1980 and 1989, at least 15 films documented here were banned, censored, or seized by authorities from Ontario to Australia. Official records confirm bans by the British Board of Film Classification and the Ontario Film Review Board, with MPAA-mandated edits cutting up to 9 minutes, and seizures under the UK's Obscene Publications Act. These actions sparked public protests, legal battles, and even print thefts, as seen with The Last Temptation of Christ in Minneapolis. Yet many original censorship files remain partially classified or redacted, and the full decision-making processes behind some bans are still undisclosed. What is clear? The 1980s forced a global reckoning with film as both art and provocation, fueling a cycle of suppression and underground fandom that shaped modern media policy. Today, several of these once forbidden films have been restored or reclassified, while others remain restricted or controversial. The evidence shows that debates over censorship, free expression, and cultural limits are not relics of the past. They continue to echo whenever a film dares to cross the line.